Okay, you're live.
Okay, we'll go ahead and start the meeting. Do we have anybody in the audience that has any questions or comments? Right away, Alicia.
Sorry, it wouldn't let me unmute. I have a couple people in the audience, but nobody's requesting to speak.
Okay. So we'll go with item agenda 1, the approval of minutes for September 15th, 2021. All of you had a chance to read those minutes. Does anybody have any amendments, deletions, or additions to those minutes? Any comments?
I'll move as submitted.
Okay.
Second.
And the motion's been seconded, so all those who approve these minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Hey,
All those opposed, say nay. Okay, the minutes are approved, and we'll go forward. To item agenda number 2, the Luxair report. Steve, I think it's you.
Yep. So Hughes Aerospace has been working on the approach, and they identified a few trees that needed to be taken down because they were too close to the runway for the approaches, and the city has come out and taken those down. The Quonset hut that is right next to the tarmac that was damaged in the derecho has continued to get worse and should probably be taken down unless anybody has a use for it. I don't think the city is actually storing anything in there. And the entrance to the airport has a ton of potholes. There's no way to get in and dodge all of them. So hopefully those can be repaired before it starts to warm up, just because when they're filled up with ice, it's not too big of a deal, but in the spring, it's going to be an issue. And then also we had somebody contact me that they have an ADSB tracking system that you guys might be interested in doing. It wouldn't cost anything for the equipment. All would need to be done was the installation. It would just be 2 antennas, and then it would need power and internet. But I think it would be a useful thing, just because rather than just relying at whoever's sitting at the front desk to count operations, it will do it automatically. Almost all aircraft are going to have the equipment on it for it to be tracked by this, and it'll give a lot of information. Some of the things it'll tell us what type of engine the aircraft has, the make and the model, and the max landing weight, which will give you an idea of how big of an airplane it is. And so then as we make improvements, we can see that how that's changing. And it'll also be able to show us which operations are done by aircraft on the field and which ones are transient. And so it would give a lot of additional information, and I think be a lot more accurate if that's something that people are interested in doing. And so I'd be interested to hear everybody's thoughts on something like that and what the city thinks of it. As usual, we have all the operations and fuel sales attached in graphs. Let's see. And finally, we've been doing semi-regular inspections on the runway to just make sure that there's no major issues there. The only thing noted is there is a single light that is out, and I have a graphic that'll indicate which light that is. And that is all I've got.
Open for comment.
On the, can you hear me? Can you hear me okay, Tim?
Yep, sure can.
On the aircraft tracking system, is there a subscription? I see the note says only cost would be installation, but there seems to be a comment about subscription also. So
Yes.
my essential question is what's in it for them?
Well, I'm sure they'd be using that that data, selling it somewhere. That's something I can look into, I suppose. The subscription would just be able to allow you to look further back in the history. However, even without the subscription, you can look 7 days in the past and even download that information. So as long as weekly it's being downloaded, I believe you'd be able to have all the information without the subscription.
Thanks.
Yeah, Tim, I got a question.
Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, thanks. Steve, since I'm not familiar with this equipment, and maybe a few of others are kind of in the same boat as I am, can you quickly describe how that would need to be installed? Is it just a receiver that is communicating with each individual aircraft? Give me a little bit of context about understanding how that would actually be installed.
Yeah, it would just be 2 antennas that would need to be installed on a building. And yeah, each aircraft has a piece of equipment in it that is going to be transmitting that information. And so all it's doing is receiving what these aircraft are sending out.
Okay. Yeah, okay. That sounds at face value pretty simple. Who's offering this, if you're at liberty to say?
It's a company called Motion Info. They are just trying to create a network of ADSB tracking so that it can be just get more accurate information on aircraft.
Yeah, sorry I asked the who. If I would just use my new eyeballs that were surgically implanted yesterday, I would have seen that in your write-up. Sorry.
That is no problem.
Do they put like a monitor in the FBO where you could see other traffic at other locations, or do you just see what's going on locally?
This information would just be local. However, if you go to FlightAware, you can already see public ADSB tracking information. This is just going to allow it to be accurate enough for the airport to be able to track operations, just because there's no equipment for tracking ADSB. Once people get close to the airport, and especially landing, you're going to lose currently any information. And so this will just kind of fill in that gap.
Do you have an estimate on what the cost of installation would be?
I do not, but I can't imagine it would be too much, because again, all it is going to be 2 antennas, and then it's going to need to be connected to a power source and an internet connection.
Do we have any idea on what size antennas they would be, Steve?
Off the top of my head, I don't remember. I think it's something like 3-foot antennas, maybe. I'll see if I can look that up real quick.
Yeah, for aviation bands, they wouldn't have to be that big. And it sounds like it's not like we have to bring them in from Massachusetts to do the installation. They send us a box of stuff and any qualified local person could do the installation, right?
That is correct.
Well, I'm just quick looking at their website, and it just seems to me this gives us a category of automated tracking and some detail that we just presently don't have the ability to collect. So seems like not a bad idea unless there's other impediments with it that we don't know.
Why don't we take a peek at it, and I can touch base with Jerry a little bit offline, and we can understand a little bit more about it. I mean, if it's something that's relatively inexpensive and makes sense, we can work with folks to move it forward if possible. So we'll kind of keep an eye on it. It sounds like there's some interest in it, and I think it makes sense to have some of it. So sound good?
Yeah. Yep. And so I did find the height. There's the taller one is a 4-foot antenna. So, and then the other one's 3 foot. So they're not very large.
Thank you, Steve.
Any other comments? We're good? Okay, move on.
Actually, just 1 second. Sorry, Tim. Before or after I sent in the report, I did get something from the DOT that the DOT funding applications are now open, and the deadline for those would be May 26th. So I figured I'd just let everyone know.
Hey,
And that is all.
Tim, I'd just like to compliment Steve on the reports that he's been generating. They're a vast improvement over what we didn't have when we started this committee. So I think Steve's doing a great job on these reports.
All right, thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, we'll move on. Agenda item number 3, the chairman's report. I really have nothing to report, other than it's cold and we're getting snow. So, I mean, it's been that kind of a winter, not a whole lot going on. So we'll move on to items for discussion and or action, introductions. Tom?
Well, I think we have someone new this evening. Ryan Waller, the new city manager, is here with us today, and he's been getting up to speed on the airport. And probably be good just to kind of do a little introduction of folks in the room, and so he's aware of our committee and such. And maybe I don't know if you want to give a little.
I'm excited to work with you all. I've learned quite a bit about airport operations in the last couple months, and been in local government 20 years-ish, and really excited to be here in Marion, and really appreciate those that serve on our boards and commissions. So thank you for your service. And we had some email correspondence, I think it was last month, when we said we were going to cancel, but we were definitely going to have this meeting. So appreciate your patience, and again, look forward to working with all of you.
Well, I can start off. I'm Tim Schaefer. I'm the chair of this commission. I'm an aircraft owner, operator, and I've been out at the Marion Airport for about 15 years. So, anybody want to go next?
I can go next if you'd like. Bonnie Roth, I'm a aircraft owner, operator. I'm also a CFI charter pilot at the Marion Airport. I've been at the airport over 20 years. That's pretty much it for me.
Looks like pilots are going first. So I'm Craig Reardon. I'm an aircraft owner and private pilot, instrument, multi-engine. Learned to fly at the Marion Airport in the early 90s. Been flying for about 30 years. And yeah, and we're based out of Marion.
I can go next. I got a chance to meet you. I was on the water board. You talked to us over there, John Bender. I've been in Marion, retired engineer for 30 plus years. Got my pilot's license, but I don't have an aircraft because my wife won't let me have one.
John, is there a board you're not involved with?
Yeah, there's a couple I don't want anything to do with. I'll let it go.
Well, thank you for all you do.
Well, I'll go next. I'm Mike Goldberg, 42 years in the public sector with a long period as administrative services with the Lynn County Board of Supervisors, and find the airport committee to be a very interesting committee.
Bob Stokes. I apologize. I don't have my laptop, iPad with me today, so I'm working off my desktop that doesn't have a camera. But Ryan, I met you at your introduction at Indian Creek Golf Course there a few months back. Got to meet you there. Been on the committee for about a year and a half. Wanted to get involved with the city more. I've been here 16, almost 17 years. And being prior Air Force, I had a lot of background in operations and on airfields and different things. So I thought maybe I might be able to throw 2 cents here or there every now and again. So just happy to be back on. I just re-upped here recently for another 3 years.
I think that's everybody, right? Okay. Moving on to item number 2, the airport operations and safety protocol update. Who's taking that?
Staff can take that one. I don't know. And Councilman Harper or Sternad, feel free to jump in. As Tom mentioned, I'm quickly getting acclimated on a number of different things. With the airport, we've got a couple different documents, at least documents or amendments. So we're working right now with Luxair on bringing everything together into one document. But one of the aspects of that is just making sure we've got some sort of memorialization of the requirement to have safety protocols. So we've been working with Luxair on putting this together. We've got a meeting with them, I think next week, to talk through that a little bit more. So right now draft status, but really trying to take all the different lease amendments that we have, bring it in together into one and allow us to then kind of focus long-term on the airport. And again, I'll throw it over to Councilman Harper or Sternad or Mike or Tom if there's anything that I left out or you think is important.
No, Ryan, I think you hit the high spots as far as from my perspective. I know this group has talked about safety related issues, safety inspections and the like. And so really, as Ryan mentioned, that's part of our discussion with Luxair and to try to formalize in our business agreement with them, just some parameters around that. We think, as we go forward, Steve, the work that in the reports that you're providing at this point, just the fact that there's a recorded runway inspection with some notations and observations to share, I mean, that's a strong step in the right direction. So we just want to be, I think, smart about building that out. Is there anything else that's appropriate to consider for the total operations of the facility? And so we're just trying to set the stage for that discussion, as well as some other considerations that are important relative to clarifying elements of the lease documentation. So That's all I would add.
Any members have any comments to city staff? No? Okay, we can move on. Airport layout plan update. Is that also Tom or somebody from city staff, I'm assuming?
Yeah, I'll take the lead and just, and I'm doing so because it's helping me, to learn as I go. So from a historical context, there's been this airport layout plan. It's my understanding that a year and a half ago, maybe a little bit more, the council did not vote on the zoning for east-west and for an east-west runway. And so that issue was really never formally put to bed. Several meetings, or a couple meetings ago, I should say, a couple of council meetings ago, our partners at Medco had come in and give an update on the industrial park and just asked the council to provide a little bit more clarity on what that east-west runway looks like, and or if that's the issue, let's put it to bed. So the city council directed us to have that on an agenda, which agenda item for discussion and direction. So that took place, I think it was the last city council meeting or council work session. So almost 2 weeks ago now. The direction was to have staff put together a document that would be presented to them for formal action to go ahead and put an official statement on record that would eliminate that east-west runway as part of consideration. And then down the road, as we get more clarity on the airport, then get into the long-term discussions with the airport layout. So we anticipate having a resolution that would, for council's consideration, that would suspend any discussion or further deliberation on the east-west runway. And we anticipate that coming April 5th, the council week of April 5th and 7th. And again, if I've missed anything or misspoke, I'd ask the council members on here or staff to jump in and correct anything that I misspoke on.
Yeah, Ryan, maybe I would just highlight a little bit. I think Jerry Cyril said it best at one of our meetings with the committee that we have an opportunity to really right size our thinking relative to our existing runway and facilities and the long range vision. So what goes in parallel with that is to really amp up a focus on thinking near term, intermediate term, and long term about the airport and the prudent things that could unfold over time. Some of that has been already quantified in the ALP, but there may be some new thinking, especially with input of the business community about things that we would want to entertain. Again, short term, intermediate term, and long term. So that's kind of, I think, formalizing a decision on east-west. That's been hanging in limbo for a year and a half, 2 years, whatever the time frame, and then doing the work necessary to set a longer range vision. So that's, I think, the upshot of how I'm thinking about what we want to achieve.
So anybody have any comments? I do, if nobody else does. So I guess the one thing I would say about eliminating east-west runway is that the concern of general citizens in this town has always been that there would not be a runway large enough to accommodate commercial traffic to grow the airport for the citizens, the businesses around the airport. So if we do not entertain the east-west runway, then there needs to be some serious additions to what we already have. in order to accommodate and get some activity that's a little bit bigger than what we have out there right now. And everybody knows the challenges that are involved with that. So there's some caution there I would take if you do eliminate it completely.
Hey,
I'd just
Tim.
like to, okay, go ahead, John.
Oh, thanks. The only thing I was going to bring up is that newer members is that this committee, along with Steve and staff, looked at the ALP and actually prioritized this together. So hopefully that's still around and you could look at that, and we actually picked the ones we thought were the most, and they were all safety related. So hopefully that list is available and you can get a chance to look at that when you go through this. Go ahead, Monty.
Oh, I would just like to say I agree with everything that Tim just said. And in order for us to continue to grow, if we totally eliminate the east-west runway, we need to really focus on improving what we have to allow us to continue to grow. That's my only comments.
And I'm the non-pilot making the comments, but Tim was saying what I was thinking, that seems to be a magic of 4,000 feet in getting to the next threshold of classification from what I've read. And that should be put back on further towards the front burner if we're going to be doing any growth to get the different type of traffic in here and the different type of planes. And I'm the non-pilot in the group here, so.
Well, just to clarify what you've said, many insurance companies will not allow aircraft to land on a runway shorter than 4,000 feet. So our hands are really tied, or we're really restricted at this point unless we go to 4,000 feet or more. It's not that they can't land, it's just that they're not allowed.
I thought it was interesting, the comment about taking into consideration kind of present and near-term future and long-term future. By eliminating the east-west runway, you're pretty much saying we're taking the long-term future off the table, because we're saying we're not going to do anything in the short term that's hard in order to get a long-term benefit. And yeah, maybe we'll add a couple 100 feet to the existing runway, and that would be good, but we kind of already were headed there. I don't want to fool ourselves into thinking that we're thinking about the long term by eliminating a runway that points into the wind, 90% of the time. It's a safety issue, it's a growth issue. And I think the other thing is that the council needs to understand they can go do whatever they want. I think we're in an advisory role, but somebody needs to say, you're hearing this committee say it's a bad idea. It was a bad idea when they didn't zone for it, and it's a bad idea to take it out of the plan. And that's what I'm hearing this committee say. So you've asked us to advise you, and just listen, that's all.
Craig, Tim, if I can just add additional comment here a little bit. And Craig,
Sure.
I appreciate your comment, Bonnie and Mike, the comments that you have made. Let me just restate what I was thinking of and trying to articulate a few minutes ago. The limitations that we currently have for the size of aircraft, the type of aircraft that would come in to the airport now, I think we've all, at least those of us close enough on the city council side, as well as the staff members, we've learned a lot about that over the last, in fact, several months. And I would just want to say that how we can develop and satisfy a longer range vision that includes a satisfying longer runway to support a different class of air traffic. That's part of the work that we have to do. And there's multiple stakeholders that ultimately will get involved in that effort. So I guess without having all of the definition and that work behind us, at least in my mind's eye, and what I've been promoting with my colleagues on council is we got to get about that business, because the runway that we have now is a constraint to in part satisfying a more complete vision for the airport. And so that's the work that we really want to do. And you know, in a perfect world, you know, it would be great if we could just instantaneously get the 4,000 feet. I think the ALP in one of the diagrams even was delineating out a length of like 53 or 5,400 feet. Well, can't get there right away, but we ought to really figure out strategies by which we can potentially do that. And so it really is to get about that business and figure out a plan to achieve it. And but I am sensitive to the comments, Craig, just what you said, but I don't think we're giving up on trying to do something that's really fundamentally useful for the airport. At least that would be my position. But we'll have to, we've got to get through some details on that.
Yeah, I think I agree with Craig, though. I believe that we all remember the history of this first endeavor was that not to make it a rich man's playground. Everybody heard that over and over again. So if we don't get some ROI for the citizens of Marion some way, we're gonna look like fools. So I don't care what we do to get it done, but we need to at least plan for something that actually gets business traffic into this airport.
And if we had that east-west runway, that would be our primary runway, right? I mean, that would be the one that gets used all the time.
Yeah, that's the one that gets used all the time in Cedar Rapids. I mean, anybody else have any more comments? We move on. Okay, moving on. Rockwood East Development Overview.
So this is Rookwood. I think in the fall, we had a conversation. We brought a land use plan to the committee and outlined the development proposal north of the airport. We and I can give me a second. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, Alicia.
You should have permission now.
Thank you, Obi-Wan. So, you know, you guys, hopefully you guys recall when we brought this plan to the committee. It's outlining development as it proceeds. This at the time, this was kind of the east boundary of Marion. This is Hinman Road to the east, Highway 151 on the bottom. You can see here's the RPZ represented, and then the runway is here. When we developed this plan, there was some critical pieces and conversations. This green space was identified as a no build zone. The land use on either side of the RPZ and the transitional surfaces were identified for some lower density commercial space. But there were, and there is identified some residential in the approach zones and in the transitional surfaces in this land use plan. And then one of the other identified pieces to this was this detention pond regional basin that was proposed on the west side of the approach zone. You can't see it very well in this illustration, but if you take a line from the RPZ and just draw it in an angle, that's the approach area. You guys recall when we talked about this in the past?
Yep.
Yep.
So what has occurred, and when we did this development plan, we'd worked with the developer, Chad Pelly. He was engaged in this as a stakeholder with the planning group, and just as indicated, he is following the development plan that we have in place, and he's bringing forward a preliminary plat, rezoning, the property's been annexed, so on and so forth. So what I want to illustrate here is the development. This is his preliminary plat, so you can see that the areas, the red is the RPZ, the blue is the transitional surface, and the yellowish orange piece is the extension of the approach zone. So I just want to bring to light that this project's moving forward. We're going to run it through the council as a discussion item just to identify that, development is being proposed. We review the zoning in accordance with the development. So when this property is rezoned, we'll also evaluate it against the airport overlay zones. A couple items to point out: the detention basin is in this area here. The developer is proposing that to be a wet basin. The zoning does allow wet basins to be established in the horizontal surface, which is where the hand is the horizontal surface. In this area and in this area here, it is where it touches the transitional surface. The man-made water bodies are identified as additional review. So because they're fairly minor in those areas, I don't think there's much of an impact, but that is just, I would ask if there's concerns from this group. Two other items to point out: when we were going through the land use planning exercise, we worked with Jerry. Jerry's on the call here, and we talked through some of the land use proposals and their locations and the approach to the transitional surfaces. This seemed to be able to be accommodated in this manner. However, when the zoning was authorized, there is some conflict. So currently, you can put residential in the approach zone in these areas, but in the transitional surface area, where the blue and the sides here, it's identified as non-compatible. Obviously, if you can put it here in the approach, it seems odd that you couldn't put it here in the transitional. The primary concern in these areas is not necessarily, airplanes flying or falling out of the sky and hitting houses, but it's more about noise. So as we start down this road, we're going to be looking at amending that airport overlay zone and identifying residential development in this transitional surface area as additional review, similar to what it is in the approach zone. Obviously, if you had homes down here next to the runway and the transitional surface in an additional review perspective, we would take a peek at that and say, well, that clearly doesn't make any sense. So it does provide a process for that additional review. But at this point, it's just flat out saying it's non-compatible. So those are a couple items that are moving forward. The project itself, the developers wanting to get this in front of both the city council and the planning commission so that there's some awareness before he does all the engineering and spends a lot of money. And if there's any major issues, he was wanting to understand that going into it. So anyway, I don't know if the committee has any questions regarding this. I think we talked about this and highlighted it when we did the land use plan, but obviously I'd like to get some perspective from you guys if you have some.
Hey, Tom,
Yeah.
this is John. I just, some advice out here in Phoenix. We are 15 miles from Luke Air Force Base. We had to sign a document that said we knew that. And we aren't going to complain. And that everybody does. That's part of the zoning out here. This is something that's should be thought about, because if you're going to be right in the approach zone, and you're right, noise is the issue, particularly from F-35s. Oh, so anyway, just think about that.
You know, that's a good point, John. I'm glad you brought that up. I in review of the guidance provided by the DOT, they do have some samples and guidance on that. And that was one thing I was going to look at as a part of the subdivisions, especially for plats that touch the approach and the transitional surfaces. It certainly makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
We can just add that in a memorandum, I think, as a part of the development.
It's in our covenants here, so I don't know if it's
okay.
legal. Who knows? Anyway.
No, I would support what John just suggested, because if we are going to be looking at extending the runway at some point, I would hate to see us get into a situation where we get a desire to extend the runway, but now we get a push from the other end of the runway saying those larger aircraft are going to be too noisy for us. Then we start getting the push on the other end. So I think we need to be cognizant of, if we want to grow and develop and have the airport develop into what we all anticipated it to be, we can't be putting anchors on the other side of the runway that's going to slow us down when we want to do that. And it comes before council, and we have a lot of citizens come in to complain about the noise from the larger planes. Let's not put ourselves in that position.
Yep.
Good point, Mike. I couldn't agree more, especially based upon the conversation we just had about the east-west runway.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Anybody else? Any other comments? Any other comments about anything?
Is that discussion of the east-west runway is on which council meeting? Did you tell us that date again?
We anticipate the week of August or April 5th. So it's April 5th and 7th. 7th would be the council meeting date.
Would there be time for this committee to be able to have on an agenda a recommendation to the city council on that issue?
That I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
If it's April 5th, then we would have another, or well, if we have another meeting. From now on.
Well, the question is also, is the council interested in having a recommendation from their airport committee on that issue?
It's my understanding that, and this is where I don't have the historical context, so my apologies on this. But it's my understanding that unofficially the council's already taken action through not rezoning, kind of identifying that the east-west runway wasn't going to be taking place. So And this isn't officially amending the ALP. This is just going on record reaffirming that action taken a year and a half ago. When was it, a year and a half ago, or was it?
Yeah,
more
I
than-
mean,
longer
when
than
the
that?
zoning was adopted, that was a major piece. I mean, I don't know, Grant and Randy, I mean, I don't know if you guys have perspective on that.
Well, here, let me. Got to make sure I've got, okay. A year and a half ago, I think it was July of 2019. I think there was action through resolution that basically suspended or in all intents and purposes terminated any consideration of east-west runway. And from my vantage point, just being new to the council, for everybody's benefit of just where my head's at, the whole question and what do we do in the absence of that has just sort of lied in a motionless state. And so my earlier commentary was really about saying, let's at least reaffirm, you know, prior decision, does that still hold? But for the longer term development of the airport, we got to get our plan in hand and understand what we're trying to work to, and then take meaningful steps to achieve that. So my position is we've just been hanging in limbo with no basis to have any forward momentum on making anything better. So I think that the action that Ryan described is, let's at least have a benchmark as to reaffirm whatever that decision was, to review it and reaffirm it from what was action taken in July of 2019, I think is the time frame.
Was that actually action that was taken, or was it failure to uphold their responsibility to comply with the ALP that they previously approved?
Well, I suppose that's one way you can interpret the situation at that time. I would just, you know, the funny thing about all of this is that when you, unfortunately, you have a changeover of council members and collective opinions change about things. And I think there was some of that went on, because the original thoughts about the airport were forged in the 2015 timeframe. So, you know, Craig,
But the original ALP has never been amended, correct?
Correct.
that's correct.
So, I mean, we're under the understanding that we're still running with the same ALP.
But I
That's
think
correct.
Yeah.
So,
But Ryan, just to comment, I think that resolution that was acted on in 2019 mid-year was, I think, saying in essence, that element of the ALP wasn't going forward. That's the problem that we're trying to unthread here.
I think just as a newcomer to the group, with kind of a, I understand that I get the history. I haven't lived through the history. I understand some of the uniqueness of how this airport is laid out with the two different parcels and the relationships between Luxair and the city. And then you have the ALP, and then so I think what Councilman Harper mentioned when we were first discussing item number 2 about, or maybe it was 2 and 3, about really getting some clarity on the relationship with the city and Luxair, and getting these amendments in one document to allow for a long-term review and really identify where are we going That helps get us to a point where we can really start focusing in on implementation of the ALP and the right size of it and what that looks like. And going through the process collaboratively with the airport committee and other key stakeholders on the future of the airport. So it's, I realize that I'm new to this group. I realize that you don't have any history of working with me. I haven't lived through this like you all have. But I would almost kind of liken it to a level set. And, you know, this is, as I understand it, there was action or inaction that was taken as it relates to the east-west runway. There was asked for some clarity. The action that we were directed to prepare is a resolution that would suspend that provision of the ALP, not officially amend it, but this work with Luxair and the lease that we talked about earlier, we got to get that done before we can start looking at the ALP, understanding the cost benefit analysis of the other aspects of the ALP, along with an east-west. I mean, from what I've been told, it's cost prohibitive, but there are certain things like lengthening the runway to serve a similar purpose. So those conversations and that research has got to take place. And that's something that we'll be able to dive into a little bit more once we get past and complete the actions that we talked about in agenda item 2.
But the ALP is what guides us going forward. And the city council failed to hold up its responsibilities with respect to the guidance given by the ALP. The next step is not to double down on the city council's insistence on resisting its responsibilities, but rather if it wants to take on changing the ALP and, you know, redirecting the course of the airport, that's the thing they ought to be doing. It's like passing a law and then saying, well, we're not going to enforce that. The solution is not to say we're not going to enforce it. The solution is to change the law. And you have an ALP and it's supposed to be a guiding document. All kinds of people are making all kinds of decisions based on that ALP. And you can't just say, oh, no, we're not going to do that. I mean, why would we do that? So either fix the ALP the way you want it and say, this is how we're going forward. But don't just double down on shirking responsibilities.
Well, Craig, I guess in my own mind, as I came into this somewhat from an innocent bystander perspective, that's exactly what I expect to see happen. Okay, so if you know, as you say, fix the regulation or fix the ordinance, which in this case is the ALP. You know, that's part of the limbo we're stuck in, that at least it seems to be rather unsatisfying and doesn't leave us in a position to then effectively move forward for anything else that we want to do to enhance the airport as we now have it. And there, you know, as we've had all these discussions before about various safety attributes, we're a little hamstrung right now because the only thing we can apply and get any grant funding and cost offset is for that property which we own. And that really curtails our ability to make necessary investments, some of which all of you have helped identify. So we're just simply, I think, at a state where we have to take some actions in order to stabilize our current situation so that we can effectively move forward. And so I have a strong appreciation for what you're saying. And anyhow, I don't know what else I can add to that sentiment.
Yeah, and I'm not saying we're obligated to build an east-west runway because somebody decided in 2014, 2015 that that's what we're going to do. I'm just saying that it doesn't seem reasonable that the next step would be to say we're not going to do what we said we were going to do. And that's all.
Yeah, I actually, in my mind's eye, a direction somewhat akin to the following seems logical to me. East-west, we're not pursuing that, and therefore amend the ALP and take actions to, in earnest, develop a plan to enhance the operational attributes of the facility as we currently have it. So that's, in terms of actionable work, that's, so I think they are coupled.
Well, I think I'm just going to speak for myself. I think the frustrating part is that us as a committee weren't a part of the process as much as we should have been. I mean, I feel kind of in the dark here on some of this stuff. And I know we haven't had a meeting in 6 months, but I feel like we should have been more involved with this decision-making process.
It does seem like some kind of I was going to say strongly worded letter, but simply a worded letter from this committee would be in order. Clearly, there's at least a few people here that don't just automatically agree with this direction. And I think it's probably our responsibility to say that. And I know we are saying that to members of the council that are here.
If you don't mind, I have a question to clarify, because the east-west runway was not zoned, and it sounds like some people are considering that as a decision being made that we weren't doing it at all. But also the any extension to the south of the north-south runway was not zoned for. So does that mean that the long-term plan for the airport no longer includes a 5,000-foot runway? Because that's one of the main goals that we're trying to get, and that wasn't zoned for either.
Well, Steve, from my own vantage point, I don't see any evidence of any planning or work done to create a vision to achieve 5,000 foot. And that's part of my, I guess, concern about all this is there have been these unanswered questions that have existed for some period of time. And my simple interest is that we, in earnest, have the right stakeholders helping create that, the pathway to get to that ultimate vision. But right now, the conversations and the planning and the decisions that are integral to all of that, there's just not a structure to have done that yet. And that's what I'm advocating for.
Grant, I don't agree. And again, we haven't met in some time, but it almost feels like, okay, hey, we're taking the east-west option off the table. We're going to encroach on the north. We're going to pigeonhole you in here, and you guys deal with it. I just, at what point it almost feels like, at what point do we figure out where are we going to move the airport? that it just almost feels that way to some degree.
Yeah, and well,
Councilman, if I can, really quick, I just, again, the long-term evaluation of the ALP is something that's going to have to take place over the next several months. And again, I realize I don't have the historical context, but there's this short-term aspect of this lease with Luxair. Council was asked for some clarity on the east-west runway at a council meeting. The direction was to just let's memorialize and have that, provide some of that clarity, and then allow for us to go for a long-term review of that ALP, which is I can't remember who said it, but it's the planning document, and let's make sure that it is right size for our community, and let's make sure that what's taking place is achievable for the community. I don't know if that helps, but there's a series of short-term, medium, and long-term things that we as a community, as an organization, as a committee, as a council are going to have to work on together. And Councilman Harper, Councilman Sternad have talked about just the partnerships and the stakeholders and making sure that the stakeholders are part of that. So.
Tom, this is Randy. Do you remember when we had our last council vote on this as far as approving that ALP? It had something to do with the zoning on that. I guess I'm the tenured council member on this, and I'm going to bring up some history here a little bit, but can you refresh my memory on that? The vote was a 6-1 no vote in moving forward. Was that moving forward with the ALP, or was that in reference to the rezoning of that east-west? Can you just recall that? And because I have another comment I want to make, but it piggybacks off of that.
So when we went through the process so we did, the ALP was approved, and then to actually enforce any land use around the airport, we had to do the zoning. That came well after. And if you recall, we went through the process to draft an ordinance for both the east-west runway, went through the county and the city. But when the ordinance was finally approved, it was only approved for the runway, and I forget the exact dimensions, but north of the trail, south of 151. And I don't remember who the vote, like what the vote was, but it was not consistent with how the ordinance was written. So we went back and changed things to only zone the north-south runway. So, but that was the decision that I think is being referenced.
Okay, so that was the one that failed the vote. Because I apologize, I wish I would have pulled these documents out, because I understand the frustration. Craig, Bonnie, Mike, Tim, I get all of what everybody's talking about. These, I'm just going to go back to say, the question really lies back to when the city actually purchased the airport to begin with, was a major question as to whether or not that was a financially good decision to make at that particular time. Since then, I've got probably the most history out there that runs out in that airport, with the exception of Bonnie, and when Perry and Jan Walton owned that, and what the history was out there. So as we take a look at this now, and this current council has inherited this particular position, it's going to continue to fail and continue to stall if we don't take some action in moving on this east-west issue. There's adjacent property holders out there. There's property developing to the north side. We're going to have approach areas, things that are going to be changing, and it's going to stall out. There's no funding for it. Right now, we don't even have a budget, a line item within the budget to address those things. So from our perspective, it only makes sense for us to, again, use the terms of right sizing this up so that we can get that vitality out there, consider that lengthening in the future, taking a look at some other opportunities so that we can get that expansion out there. We know when these reports were done back in 1980 and 1990, this was the absolute worst place for an airport. And we're still dealing with that today. If you could drop this further north and go out and, buy the land to build this out, that's exactly what we should have done back then. So unfortunately, we're stuck with, it will stall out if we do not do anything. And by keeping that east-west in there, we have to start working this backwards so that we can get this right sized up and start getting that air traffic in there and start taking a look at trying to get that expansion and get that lengthened back out so that we can get something. It's just, we're not getting anywhere with it. How many more years do we need to continue to keep, leaving it where it's at today, without putting this together and getting it framed up so that we can create budget line items for it, start getting some regulations and some things put into place so that we can get proper management and everything set up out there. So I understand everybody's frustration. Council is as well equally frustrated with what we have at this today. Craig, I appreciate your comments and saying that, that the council's not moving through with what was actually designed. The ALP is truly the Bible of what the direction should have been on this. That's why council is more active in this group over the last 2 to 3 years so that we thoroughly understand this before it comes to council. The last time we seen this committee before council was only to give a very strong opinion to say that east-west runway should have been approved and the ALP should have been approved and agreed upon to move forward. So I would encourage you to come forward to speak to the rest of the council, but I've got a very strong opinion about this east-west. That's kind of why we're where we are today. If we do not take some movement with this, it's going to stay right. We're going to be having this conversation with next term elections. It's not feasible. There's no money there. So my opinion would be is to right size this up and get some activity going out there. And it was overextended at the time when we accepted the ALP and when we purchased it. And in the meantime, we've got residential property wanting to build and commercial property to build around this, and everything's being held up, from that perspective. But I share the same frustration. I feel the emotions from everybody on what's being delivered here today and where we're going to be, moving forward with this. But we're just going to stall out here if we don't take some type of corrective measures to it.
Randy, I would agree. I'm hearing what Grant and you are saying, and it both sounds like the same. Like we need planning on what the future holds for this airport, whether it resides where it is or a different location. I keep hearing that over and over. Like we need to plan. We need to plan. How do we get there? Who needs to be a part of that team? Who needs? Are we hiring RDG? Are we working with Mike and his team? Like what? I mean, it's. Do we get with Medco? Do they want to purchase the land and we look out further? I mean, this is a lot to take in tonight, obviously.
I totally agree. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on someone there if someone else was going to talk. Bob, you're spot on that. It's, who does make that up? We want to engage Medco because there needs to be more of an economic component to this. The other component to this that I sometimes think that we're forgetting a little bit is if we continue to keep the east-west in there and we create a line item budget for this, how do we take that back to the taxpayers? How do we pay for this on the residential side without getting some type of commercial or larger entity involved with this? I've been the one pounding on the drum saying that we need to look at corporate America. We need to get the hospitals involved with this. We need to get corporate America involved with it. Until you build it, they will come. But until we find the resources and the funding for that, it's just not going to happen. And when you tie up this, so come back to your question, Bob, as to, who's all being part of this. That's why, Jerry's part of this. Our current resources there. We want to get Nick involved with this with Medco. If we do decide that we're going to negate the east-west out of this, then what can we do on the north-south to extend it? I know that's not the preferred, we'd rather have that east-west runway in there, but it's just landlocked. It was landlocked when we bought it. So, that would be for more conversation. And, obviously with we got new leadership here, we all know what the leadership has been like in the past as far as getting not only this committee, but all the organizations together to get us to the point that we are today. So with new leadership in City Hall, we're hopeful that we're moving this thing rapidly so that we can at least have a defined, runway and run strip, a strip on this deal here. Same thing going on with the developers, Lux Air, Lux Air is in the same situation. I mean, we've all seen the designs and layouts on that, on what proposals were in the past. We're not even anywhere near what those proposals were, years ago. So I personally think we're at a crossroad. There comes a time when we've got to take drastic measures and drastic changes so that we can make something new of this and rescale it so that it's in the proper lineup for what it is.
If I may,
I've got-
Nick Glue is actually on from the public perspective, is actually requesting to speak, if you guys want me to grant him access.
I just have one more comment on this, though, regarding the reason that we got the largest grant from the Iowa DOT, though, was based on that ALP. So that runway is a DOT asset right now. And if we go back on our ALP, they're never going to give us a dime again. And that actually is the truth. So, I mean, to drudge up a little history, that's how that all happened.
That's correct, but that grant had nothing to do, there's nothing in the grant written about the east-west runway that is attached to that.
But it's in the ALP and it's based on the ALP.
So what we would be saying is we'll move forward and we don't have the financing to put the east-west in there, nor do we have the zoning properly done for that. So how do we fictitiously keep saying that we're going to have an east-west runway in there if we can't do the proper build out for it?
We didn't have the funding to do a north-south runway. And we did that. I don't think anybody is saying that, starting in the fall, we need to build an east-west runway. I think the idea is it's in the plan, and I don't know what the time frame of that plan is, but it might be 20, 30 years, or whatever, but not next week and not next year. But if you don't, that's the whole problem. If you don't plan for it now, it's the same thing that happened. Like, we can't go south, we can't go north because they failed to zone for that. You have to have the plan in place so that you can stop development that obliterates your opportunity to do the plan. And again, if you want to make a plan that locks the whole airport into what it is now, that's, then I suppose that's what they ought to do. It's disappointing.
And I agree. And just a shirt tail off of that one, what we have is we have property that is still being held by individuals or a company that they can't continue to keep holding on to it. So who purchases the land that would be, potentially needed for that? The stakeholders that are holding the property today, they can't continue to keep holding it. So we would need to make a purchase of that. And again, too, it comes back to funding to acquire all of the land for that future use. And then that puts us again right back into our own current position because of all of the planning and zoning that goes out there. The west side of that east-west runway is not as big as issue as it would be to the east side of that. We know that will not remain agriculture out there. I've got a lot of that personally insured out there, and I know that there's movement moving out there on the agriculture side. So it's again one of those things. You're right, Craig. It has to be planned, and that was where the difficulties lie over the last 10 years that have been moving out there.
Well, this is John. The only comment I'd make is Cedar Rapids has had a parallel runway in their ALP for 50 years. All they did was buy the land. And they did get control of the land. And I think that's what you're talking about is the cost. you control the land and you build it whenever you can build it. Who knows when that runway is going to happen out there?
Alicia, this is Bob Stokes again. I don't know that I have the authority, but I would love to hear Nick Lou's comments on this, because I know that they're marketing to prospective companies that are coming into this area. And so I don't know, Tim, if that's something you can allow or who needs to make that.
Yep,
but I'd
that's
love to
fine.
hear-
Yep.
Nick, go ahead whenever you're ready.
All right. Yeah, great dialogue. I appreciate it. Obviously we are huge champions for the airport. It wasn't all that long ago that, we're the ones counting votes down at the DOT and getting that over the top for the runway. So we're huge advocates for the airport. We've platted property, to accommodate the I guess the boundaries of the future runway and all that type of stuff. And we've taken development ground that was developed and built out and infrastructure installed for really industrial commercial development that our community is very hungry for. And then mark that as reserved as we've continued to try to be the best partners that we can out in that area. I think the one strategic priority for us this year is helping you all and playing our part to really achieve clarity around specifically what's going on with the east-west runway. We continue to own that property. We pay property taxes. We pay property taxes on that ground, and that's fine. But as companies begin asking us, hey, we're interested in this property. I think it's about 30 acres between both sides of the ground. I think even from our perspective as big champions for the airport, we just ask the questions, or what is the plan for that particular area? Because as we start running low on ground, we're also starting to ask, well, where do we do this next? Where do we continue to grow opportunity for business? And unfortunately, when you look at our land use plan in the community, we could go east, we could go south, and in both ways, this airport plan comes into play in how we master plan for future development. So I guess perhaps in many ways, like all of you, we ask that question of, we've been huge champions of the ALP. We've been huge advocates for the grants. The ALP is a great master plan that I think was done through the lens of what can we maximize within this footprint of ground that we have available to us. But I think the fair question, and we listen into the city's conversations about CIP and priorities and infrastructure demands and where dollars need to be spent. And I think we have the same question of how and when will the east-west runway fit into those long-range priorities. And maybe it can. Maybe as we start looking through this, we can more closely identify a plan for that. But if we can't, I think we just have to ask a fair conversation of how can we maximize then, not eliminate an east-west and then also shrink north-south, but how can we double down then on north-south to ensure that we can accomplish many of the same things through the plan that the current full ALP suggests. So I think our interest is just on the clarity and with past council action, just understanding that true commitment and the actual reality of if this long range plan is actually feasible to begin with. And so that's our perspective. We're excited to be a part of the dialogue. We're going to continue to be huge champions for the airport. But in development and business, kind of clarity and certainty are important items. And so that's kind of where, as we look at the next iteration of industrial park development, everybody being on the same page with the airport is really important.
Okay, anybody else have any other comments or? Okay, we'll adjourn. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night, all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.